Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 4th of September 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Good to have you back. Well, let's get straight on with it.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 328. The noes to the left, 301.
Not a good start.
So there we go, Patrick. Boris lost his vote. As we reported on Monday's programme, David Gauke was suggesting, David Gauke, of course, one of the rebels in the vote last night, suggesting that Boris Johnson was using this as a strategy. And maybe we'll consider what that strategy is as we go through this today. But really fascinating situation. Boris said that the vote and the bill, which is being laid by the opposition, being laid before Parliament today, to take a no deal off the table, weakens his hand in negotiations with the EU. Well, in fact, during Prime Minister's questions today, the main question that people were asking Boris Johnson is there a negotiation happening at all, actually, because, of course, the EU says there isn't. So Boris said that the bill puts the timetable for Brexit in the hands of the EU. Now, it's being described as a surrender bill. And so basically, to break this down, last night there was a vote on whether Boris is entitled to run a no-deal scenario or not. And subsequent to that vote, there is a bill in Parliament today to actually force him to extend the Article 50 procedure and to take no deal off the table. So last night's motion was tabled by Oliver Letwin, who of course is a Conservative Party member, MP, and he is unsurprisingly one of the rebels that finds themselves losing the Tory whip. But anyway, in response, Jeremy Corbyn had this to say.
And so he wants to table a motion for a general election. Fine. Get the bill through first in order to take no deal off the table.
Order! Point order! Order! Very rude for members. Order! 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 I say to the Chancellor of the Duchy.
So, absolute clown show in the House of Commons last night. The vote was lost. Jeremy Corbyn then says that they're going to present a bill forcing an extension of Article 50. Boris Johnson says, right, okay, if that's the situation, then we're going to present a motion to bring about a general election. Now, of course, subsequent to that, he got no support for that. And as you've just heard, Jeremy Corbyn saying, well, okay, if you want to have a general election, go right ahead, but only once this bill is passed, right? So that's the situation. And the question then is there a deal or is there a no deal?
Well, this is the only man who can solve this problem for Britain right now, Mike. It's Noel Edmonds. Is there a deal or is it going to be no deal? This is the big question. And the two protagonists in this particular theatrical drama are Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson here. And I just want to reiterate, looking at the fine print, really, of the situation, this is from Jeremy Corbyn. He said many on the bench opposite would relish a no deal. So what he's saying there is leaving without a deal would place Britain at the mercy of Donald Trump and U.S. corporations with a one-sided trade deal. That's Jeremy Corbyn. That's a very interesting statement by Her Majesty's loyal opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, Mike, because we have opposing statements coming from the Johnson camp, saying roughly talking about the same subject, but saying the opposite, which is that I have a big bilateral trade deal in the pipeline right now with the United States, which is going to effectively offset any potential negative effects of crashing out of the EU or any trade that we might lose with Europe, but which is substantial because Europe buys much more product from Britain than Britain buys from Europe. So, Britain should have theoretically the upper hand on any trade negotiations with Brussels, Mike, but as you know, it's not just about trade negotiations.
No.
It's about many, many other things.
Absolutely. So Boris claiming that he's got a trade deal imminent with the United States. He's claiming he's renegotiating things with the EU. Have we had any statements from the United States about this trade deal in the last week or two? Is there any evidence that there is actually a negotiation coming towards its end?
Well, there's a lot of talk in the last couple of weeks because John Bolton visited the UK, Mike Pompeo visited the UK. They're all crowing about this potential amazing trade deal, historic trade deal. So the special relationship couldn't be any better. Now, if you look from a financial point of view, Mike, how does this look in terms of the markets? Is it feasible for a transatlantic trade deal? Look at how the pound has dropped. Okay, it's very much in line with the dollar now. These are optimum conditions for bilateral trade, to have some sort of uniformity between the two currencies. That's a huge advantage, okay? So from that point of view, it looks really good. From the City of London point of view, it looks really good. It looks really good because this would guarantee a flight of capital into the UK. I'm talking about the high-end capital from the financial services sector. As we know, the City of London is much less regulated than Wall Street. Things are a lot looser. I would say if deregulation is the song of the day, if deregulation and privatization are the song of the day for Washington and for the Boris Johnson government, then the City of London is the place to make that party happen. And so Brussels now has to they do have to think about their economy too, because they could stand to go into an economic dip if the UK signed a major trade deal with the United States, and that would also put a lot of pressure, I think, economically on Brussels. Because this could, in the end, play into the narrative that Johnson's been singing all along, that Trump's been singing all along, that Europe is bad for the economy, it's bad for Britain, it's bad for all these other things. So they could actually make it bad by creating an economic downturn in Europe.
Okay, well, in the meantime, Boris has attempted to play the general election card. It seems to have not worked, however, because, of course, under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, it used to be before the Fixed Term Parliaments Act that, of course, a Prime Minister could choose to hold a general election at any time. But the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, brought in by the coalition government under David Cameron and Nick Clegg, has scuppered that. So basically now his only option is either a simple majority with a no confidence vote. Well, that would be a bit embarrassing for Boris Johnson right at the very beginning of his premiership, or he needs to have a 2/3 majority in the House of Commons in order to declare a general election. He's clearly not going to get that. As we've just heard, Jeremy Corbyn saying that, well, he might get it if he allows this surrender bill, as he's calling it, to go through. But what would be the situation if there were a general election?
Well, this was just released here, just to let you know what Labour is saying to its members, Mike. The BBC's Laura Kusenberg has claimed that Jeremy Corbyn's team is clear. They will back a general election once the anti-no deal legislation is on the statute books, as you just said. But this is the email here sent out to Labour supporters this morning, saying that last night's victory was a vital step in preventing a disastrous no-deal Brexit. And once that is secured, we'll head towards a general election. So the language is clear, Mike, but it's also a little bit ambiguous, the language. There's a little bit of room for maneuver there. Are you reading? Can you read between the lines there?
Well, the question is whether Jeremy Corbyn actually thinks he could win an election against Boris Johnson.
Yeah, so they're saying we'll head towards a general election.
Yes.
They're not saying we're going to call a general election. So they're actually sending mixed messages, speaking with a bit of a forked tongue on this case here. But let's look at if there was a general election theoretically, what exactly would we be looking at here? And so this is from Statista. So these are the predicted winners and losers of a snap election. As you can see, well, let's take a closer look here at this stat here. So 326 seats needed for an overall majority. And as you can see, Conservatives 311, Labour 242. And of course, the important one is the orange bar there. That's the Liberal Democrats' potential partners with Labour if they were to cobble together a coalition. So my question is, and as Brexit Party is not included in that, I don't know why, Mike, but I think it's because, is it likely or unlikely that they have anybody standing for any parliamentary seats?
Oh, I think they intend to, and they particularly intend to stand if they feel that Boris Johnson's strategy is to get the backstop moved into the future relationship and then represent Theresa May's deal otherwise unchanged. But the other group, of course, that aren't on that particular diagram is the DUP. So that even if he had the 10 DUP seats, that wouldn't take him over the necessary numbers. So how much we read into polls, I don't know, but it's still not quite looking.
And what about the SNP?
They will absolutely sit with Labour and the Liberal Democrats.
Right.
So there's a potential for a three-way coalition there.
So it's a dead heat in many ways, isn't it?
It seems to be still that's the situation. So it's a little unclear how we've moved forward from Theresa May at this point.
So Boris is essentially back at square one where Theresa May is. He could get a deal on October 17th, right? But it could get voted down again by the House of Commons.
Well,
the same way that he voted against Theresa May's bill, didn't he?
Twice.
Yeah.
Well, look, yes, well, that's true. But the question is he still on square one? Because, of course, what David Gauke was saying on Monday was that Boris is using this entire strategy as a way to get rid of these people. So on screen at the moment we have the 21 rebel Conservatives that voted against the government last night, including David Gauke, Kenneth Clarke, Rory Stewart, Philip Hammond in there as well, Oliver Letwin. Well, in fact, it was Oliver Letwin, as I say, that presented the motion in the first place. So Justine Greening, so some pretty big names in there. Guto Bebb, who's one of those people accused Boris Johnson of hypocrisy. He said that this was all being caused by Dominic Cummings, his special advisor, Boris's special advisor. So Guto Bebb said, it's frankly rather hypocritical of a Prime Minister who constantly voted against the previous Conservative Prime Minister and taking this action against people who voted against him. If you follow that, it's very it's very yes minister kind of language. None of this would have happened if it wasn't for the way in which Number 10 and the Prime Minister have handled the whole issue. That decision to prorogue Parliament on the advice of Dominic Cummings has misfired spectacularly. Well, has it? Anyway, let's come on to the bill itself. This is Hilary Benn's bill, the so-called surrender bill. It's being backed by a cross-party group of Remainer MPs. What is Hilary Benn saying here? The purpose of the bill is to ensure that the UK does not leave the European Union on the 31st of October without an agreement unless Parliament consents. He said the bill gives the government time either to reach a new agreement with the European Union at the European Council meeting next month or to seek Parliament's specific consent to leave without a deal. If neither of these two conditions has been met, however, by the 19th of October, i.e. the day after the European Council meeting concludes, then the Prime Minister must send a letter to the President of the European Council requesting an Article 50 extension until 31st of January 2020. The form of the letter is set out and scheduled to the bill. If the European Council agrees to an extension to the 31st of January 2020, then the Prime Minister must immediately accept that extension. If the European Council proposes an extension to a different date, then the Prime Minister must accept that extension within 2 days unless the House of Commons rejects it. So that's the situation. It's being called a surrender bill because what everybody is saying is that it effectively puts the timetable for everything in the hands of the European Commission and the European Council. Now, of course, this bill, Patrick, has to not only pass through the House of Commons, it has to pass through the House of Lords, and it has to be done basically by next Thursday because that's the latest date that Parliament would be prorogued. So as of next Thursday, Parliament will be shut down. So it turns out the House of Lords, via the shadow leader of the House of Lords, have proposed a business motion in the House of Lords, which would change the normal way things are done there, and that bill would be pushed through rather more quickly than usual. Unfortunately, the people that don't agree with this particular tactic, which are people that are supporting Boris Johnson within the House of Lords, have now tabled 102 amendments so far to that bill, and each amendment has to be voted on twice. And so what we're looking at here is
a type of filibustering?
Well, it is a type of filibustering, and it's basically talking, I can't remember, I think it's about 100 hours or something in total of time is going to be required to get through all that.
And attendance, which is a big issue for the Lords, right?
Well, exactly.
Attendance.
So you know, that is a fascinating situation. It looks like there's serious efforts to delay it in the House of Lords, and if it's delayed before Thursday, well, that bill could not progress.
So the Law Lords will be earning their money then over the next couple of weeks.
Well, exactly.
You'll be getting your money's worth from the Law Lords.
Absolutely. So let's just have a look at what the situation here, the next steps. So what do we have? Boris has tried last night, or announced last night that he's going to try for a snap election. He's laying that motion today. That's not likely to pass, so that's probably not going to happen. Labour and other Remainers are trying to remove the no deal option from the table. And this would become a condition of them passing the motion for a general election. Parliament is prorogued next Thursday at the latest, and so the question is it possible to get that bill, the Hilary Benn bill, through by that time? And as we just said, that may not be possible. Boris claims he's continuing negotiations with the EU. The EU is pretty much denying that there are any negotiations taking place. So during Prime Minister's questions today, the question very much was, are there any negotiations taking place? Boris wouldn't really answer that question. He said, well, of course, negotiations would be taking place in secret. So then European Council meeting, 17th, 18th of October. What happens if Boris returns with a deal? If he can magically pull the rabbit out of the hat and get the backstop sorted out, then the likelihood is he is going to try to present Theresa May's otherwise unchanged deal to Parliament to get that through. So that's pretty much where we are at the moment. It's clearly complete chaos, and Parliament doing their best to make sure that, at least in the eyes of the general public, that they are not fit for purpose. In the meantime, we should mention this because this is Joe Moham, QC. Now, of course, he was taking a court case with a number of other people in Scotland to try to get the prorogation of Parliament stopped. Well, in fact, they lost that this morning. So Lord Doherty in the Court of Session ruled that any suspension of Parliament is political territory and the courts cannot rule on it. So this is Joe Moham's response. The idea that the Prime Minister suspends Parliament, that if the Prime Minister suspends Parliament, the court can't get involved, looses some ugly demons. If he can do it for 34 days, why not 34 weeks or 34 months? Where does this political power end? Of course, this is part of the royal prerogative to prorogue Parliament. Normally when that happens, there is a date for when Parliament returns with a Queen's speech. As Boris Johnson was saying again today, this is the longest sitting Parliament in 400 years. It's been sitting for 2.5 years now, basically. And so it is time, without question. I appreciate that there's political shenanigans going on.
The answer to the last question, Mike, where does this political power end? The answer is simple, at the ballot box.
Absolutely, at the ballot box, that's true.
And that's up to both sides of the aisle to make that happen.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, they are going to try and bring this case to the Supreme Court by the 17th of September. So we will wait to see what happens. Well, it is quite a spectacular level of chaos we're seeing at the moment, but makes life interesting. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK Column's doing and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where there are options for you to join us there. Any support, much appreciated. Just a quick reminder of the GCMAF Awareness Day on the 11th of September outside Parliament. Begins at 11:11. Do get along to that if you possibly can to support David Noakes and Lynn Thayer and GC MAF actually as a supplement. And just a reminder that Ian Crane is running his 5G talks, a tour of the country, 7 p.m. for 7:30 start, beginning on the 9th of September in Bristol, ending on the 11th of October in Cardiff. And as you can see, a whole bunch of dates in between. Do get along to one of those if you possibly can. Okay, where does that take us, Patrick? Roger Waters.
Well, if any of you were fortunate enough to attend this event, it was quite historic. This was just actually outside the Home Office down in SW1 on Marsham Street. This is Roger Waters, co-founder of Pink Floyd, supergroup Pink Floyd. He played a rendition, serenaded the Home Secretary, if you will, with a rendition, acoustic rendition of Wish You Were Here. And this was quite an amazing event, Mike. A makeshift stage with a few thousand people. And the police were there as well, law enforcement were there to sort of do crowd control. It was interesting. There was no press there from the British mainstream press, if you can believe that.
Nobody?
Nobody, not one outlet.
So what, there was Russia Today and that was it?
A few internationals.
Right.
And that was it.
What about the United States?
Nothing, zero. So this was publicized ahead of time. It was publicized on social media, and you consider the musical and cultural stature of somebody like Roger Waters, putting aside the importance of Julian Assange's issue. But the people were out, and it was quite a moving event actually.
Okay.
So we covered that as well. I live streamed that on Facebook to some of our members, and there's just an image there. This is John Pilger, who did a nice foreword to Roger Waters, and gave a pretty powerful speech there, and really challenged the Home Office, the British government, to end the persecution of the WikiLeaks founder, of a journalist and a publisher who's currently in Belmarsh prison, coming to the end of his bail skipping charge, but he'll remain in custody under a U.S. extradition order. So that case is ongoing. You use a little shot of the crowd there. You can get an idea. This is just behind the press pit. This will be like facing the stage, the small stage there. So there's a great crowd out, and a really diverse crowd actually, Mike. You had a lot of different types of people there. A lot of different people from all over Europe actually I met.
And what was the awareness within people that were there about the sort of bigger issues at stake here?
High level of political awareness.
Right.
People weren't there to see Roger Waters. They weren't just Pink Floyd fans that were there. So it was. I mean, I'm sure it is a big event, but I think what you'll find is there's an interesting cross section of people who are fans of Roger Waters and that type of music, 60s rock, to socially conscious, politically active people today. So there's definitely an intersection, absolutely. And this was the brother of Julian Assange. His name is Gabriel Shipton, and he gave a moving address. I mean, really powerful. You can watch this up on 21st Century Wire, but you can also watch it. It's been disseminated around social media as well. Gabriel Shipton gave a fantastic address about his brother. He visited his brother recently and is very worried about the health and well-being of his brother. A lot of people are saying Julian Assange's health is really not great, even though he's been transferred to the medical wing of Belmarsh. So that's something to consider. There's a lot of people out there, some political people as well, not many, but you'll see Chris Williamson there, MP from Derby. Of course, he's very strong on this issue, along with many other Assange supporters there, Mike. So it was a fantastic event. I was happy to be there and happy to witness that, and some great people in attendance.
Okay, media issues now, I suppose, related in some ways. How young people consume the news and the implications for mainstream media. This is a report by Flamingo. It was commissioned by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University. Well, what are the key conclusions? They're saying that people are, I apologize, I kind of got tripped up there. But anyway, insights on, so they've been using social media insights to look at how young people are watching the news, consuming the news, and they're saying that anyone under 35 is less loyal to traditional news brands, mostly prefer to get their news from social media, that they are aware of fake news, they are concerned about fake news, but they're not actually any more reliant on mainstream media as a result. So they say that there are differences in attitudes between Generation Z, or Gen Z, if that's how you pronounce it. This is people aged between 18 and 24. And they consider them to be the first generation of true digital natives. So these are people that have never consumed news pre the internet. And they're saying that Gen Z seems to have higher expectations of flawless, seamless, personalized online experience than people that are in the next age bracket. So they want the instant gratification, but they're not really so concerned about this fake news idea. They say that they're more wary of the news they find in social media, but that is not making them any more reliant on the mainstream media. So perhaps we should see that as a positive thing. Many people are quite cynical about what the younger generation's attitude to news and news production is, whether they're in the slightest bit interested in the news at all. This report seems to be suggesting that they are very interested in it, but actually the mainstream media isn't doing a very good job of capturing the minds of young people.
My concern when reading a report like this one, Mike, is that are they able to differentiate between, in terms of fake news, mainstream media fake news, or supposedly alternative media or rogue blogger fake news, as the narrative goes?
Well, of course, this being a Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism report is unlikely to be considering the possibility of mainstream fake news. But if you look at what they say, it found that perceived scale of the fake news problem is relatively small compared with the public attention it seemed to receive. So that's saying that they don't view this fake news, or at least they're not falling for the fake news narrative. And that has got to be a positive thing.
Yeah, because that's a governing principle of the mainstream conspiracy theory that the Russians somehow, meddled in the 2016 election by putting out fake news for Donald Trump,
right,
and against Hillary Clinton. So that, in a way, that's a mainstream admission that the so-called rogue fake news on Facebook virus, if you will, that was a weaponized Russian fake news, that doesn't actually hold water. So that's very interesting. So we'll use certain parts of that.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll cite that report for a few reasons.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of mainstream media fake news, this is the Jewish Chronicle, and they have been forced to make an apology and to pay £50,000 to Interpol. Now, you're aware of this organization. This is a pro-Palestinian charity.
This is not only a pro-Palestinian charity, this is the biggest Palestinian charity. This is Interpol acts as an umbrella for dozens and dozens of different organizations, NGOs, charities that provide aid and support to Palestinians in many different ways. If you have some sort of initiative, or you want to do something, you can work through an organization like Interpol, which can make it official what you're doing and give it some sort of legal structure as well. And they act also as a kind of intermediary between governments as well. So it's a really important organization. It has been for decades, Mike. So Interpol is. So this is kind of the reckless defamation that some of the media do against anything that has a Palestinian name to it.
Well, and in fact, that same type of reckless defamation is at the basis of the whole Labour Party anti-Semitism thing as well.
You can't separate that from this, because
right,
they're essentially the same thing. And in the U.S., it's the Trump administration, the right-wing so-called conservative media do the exact same thing. Hamas is all terrorists. Gaza are populated by terrorists. They don't have a right to defend themselves against the IDF, against the occupying Israelis. and Hezbollah are all terrorists, and the Lebanese don't have a right to defend themselves against the IDF, attacking their country, et cetera, et cetera. This is all part of the same sort of rhetoric. And it's quite encouraging to see that Interpol won this lawsuit. I think this is a good sign.
So the Chronicle, Jewish Chronicle said, "We accept that neither Interpol nor its trustees have ever been involved with or provided support for terrorist activity of any kind. We apologise unreservedly to the trustees for any distress caused and have agreed to pay them damages for libel." So that was £50,000. Now, I thought this was interesting. This is a new section of the BBC website, or a new article on the history of the BBC section of the website called The Secret War. And I do suggest people go and have a look at this. The subhead is "The wartime BBC was involved in a range of top secret activities, working closely with the intelligence agencies and military." And so what it's saying is that as well as making programs for the public, the wartime BBC was involved in a range of top secret activity. This is as a result of newly released archives, which are lifting the veil on the BBC's role in the world of signals, codes, and special operations. So this is a previously unheard account giving insight into the secret progress of playing certain music at the end of news bulletins. Now, of course, everybody knows from popular culture that certain phrases and certain words were used during news broadcasts during the Second World War to give past information to various resistance groups on the mainland. But this gives a lot more detail of the type of activities that they were up to and the fact that they were working with the security services as they were at the time and various other intelligence agencies. Now, we're constantly told, Patrick, that effectively we're in an information war at the moment, that we're in a wartime footing, fighting against fake news and disinformation. And so my question is the BBC behaving any differently today than it was during the Second World War? Of course, no direct evidence to say that they are changing the content of news programs or their news reports in order to pass messages. But you do wonder.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't comment on that specifically, but what I can comment on is coverage of Syria. Certainly, a documentary like "Saving Syria's Children," we can see that the BBC is involved in really customized propaganda for specific theaters to advance NATO-allied agendas and geopolitical objectives, military objectives, and working really through opposition groups, armed jihadist terrorist groups. That's been proven in that case. The BBC were actually working, I think one of their drivers were Arar al-Sham, and we also saw ISIS flag in the back of one of the vans as well. But not only that, the BBC just conducted an investigation. I don't know if you saw this or not, we're not covering it today, but it's called Double Tap. And it's about war crimes by the Russian Air Force in Idlib, crimes against humanity, against the civilians of Idlib, who all of a sudden became an issue as soon as the Syrian army were advancing to liberate its territory, which has basically been occupied by Al-Qaeda and a whole array of affiliates, Mike. So that's an investigation by the BBC, and I made a comment to one mainstream media journalist who was praising this great reporting by the BBC. I said that BBC and investigations in a place like Syria is an oxymoron. It's not happening. So you have to look through the BBC's reporting, and you really have to assume that there is high-level propaganda when there's big things at stake. The Ukraine, Syria, when there's NATO objectives at stake, when there's U.S. Military objectives and foreign policy at stake, they're going to protect the interests of their government, their investments. And if they're investing in rebel groups, the British government, the Americans, the French are investing in NGOs that are in there working with those so-called rebels or terrorists in the case of Syria, then the media, the mainstream media, is naturally, like Channel 4 has been proven to do, like BBC has been proven to do, like Sky News has done, who actually, Sky News was running with a known Al-Qaeda PR man. Bilal Abdul Karim, Alex Crawford, seemed to be her guide in her recent Idlib report with Sky. Okay, they're going to be producing reports that are going to support the objectives of the government. That should be assumed because it's been proven time and time again. So why would it not be the case going forward? You know, so in almost every case.
Any suggestion by the BBC or any criticism of Russia alleging any kind of double tap incident is sheer hypocrisy by the BBC, because of course Russia's not allowed to do that, and indeed Russia shouldn't do that, but Russia's not allowed to do that. But Saudi Arabia can do it as much as it likes in Yemen without any criticism.
Sure, but you also have to look at where the BBC is getting its witness statements, where it's getting its data from rebels being backed by the U.S., Britain, and France, and NATO and Turkey, and NATO allied countries. That's where they're getting the information and the witness statements and the data and the claims from their so-called sources on the ground. This is the same as CNN or any of the other mainstream media outlets doing the exact same thing.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to a little bit of international stuff now. And here we've got Exercise Northern Coasts. This is NATO, 3,000 troops, 40 ships, 18 nations taking part in exercise. The annual Northern Coast Naval Exercise started yesterday, and it runs until the 19th of September. This is a recurring exercise. It's been taking place in the Baltic Sea since 2007. This year, the exercise scenario is a fictitious regional country raising territorial claims over islands in the Baltic Sea using its naval forces to threaten freedom of navigation. Which country could that be?
I don't know. Maybe it's can't be Finland. No.
No.
Must be Russia.
Must be. Acting on a UN mandate, allied and partner forces will seek to restore freedom of navigation. Training will also include maritime surveillance, naval combat, air defence, anti-submarine warfare and mine clearance. So that's good stuff. So it's Belgium, Denmark, Germany, Estonia, Finland, France, Italy, Canada, Croatia, Latvia, Lithuania, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom and the United States. So there we go. And just to end today, Patrick saw this in RT about Hong Kong. We haven't really covered the Hong Kong situation too much so far in this programme. But of course the protests in Hong Kong, at least notionally, because of an extradition bill, which was in the Hong Kong Assembly. So this has caused months of protests. That bill was suspended. That wasn't enough for the protesters. So apparently the Hong Kong government has announced the withdrawal of that bill completely. But the question I asked you earlier was, because you've been following this a lot closer than I am, how much external interference has there been in this, and how much incitement from external forces? And you suggested just having a quick look at the National Endowment of Democracy as one example. And so it does seem that they're putting quite a bit of money into Hong Kong at the moment, into various NGO groups.
Yeah, not only that, what they're doing is grooming future quote, democratic leaders in Hong Kong. And there is photos as well that are circulated on social media with leading protesters being photographed with various U.S. officials or NGO officials from these types of organizations. So there's clearly coordination there, and also the messaging. A lot of the messaging is in English, and it's right across the board. There's also a lot of fake news being circulated as well. Claims of the Hong Kong police have said or done this, or emails that have been leaked, and so forth. So there is a lot of deception going on. The bottom line is there's an active effort by the United States, by its allies, to potentially pry Hong Kong back away from China, or at least keep it in a sort of current non-governable state. The Chinese government is very, very cautious, Mike, not to come down too hard publicly. They understand the power of global media. They understand the power of social media. So not to come down too hard and create another Tiananmen Square type narrative that could somehow marginalize or make their life difficult as they're trying to make their way in the international scene. And
do you think this removal of this bill will be seen as a climb down?
Not necessarily. I think if you look at the Chinese government, how they normally react, they're very methodical. They don't take snap decisions. They don't want to show themselves to be reactionary. So they could very well bleed this situation in Hong Kong out for a period of time, even 6 months. The Chinese are in no rush, Mike. It's an old civilization.
Yeah.
So for them, a year is nothing. But to an insurgent democratic movement, a year is everything. So China does have the advantage that they're a lot more patient. Maybe they can wait this out. The bottom line is, what is the quality of life in Hong Kong? Is it bad? What is the unemployment level like? Is it high? Is it low? And if you look at the average protester out there, they're all middle class. They're all fairly well-to-do. They look like they're, quite hip and with it. They've all got, 1,000-pound iPhones in their pocket. So they don't seem to be starving and in need of bread. So that's a mark against, their effort. I think that how long can they maintain this air of victimhood when they're now seen on video beating up journalists, beating up police officers, beating up citizens, beating up anybody who's supporting the Chinese government, or getting violently attacked by these so-called democratic protesters. So who knows, Mike? But it's not just the National Endowment for Democracy that's behind this. Steve Bannon is really also running point on this kind of demonization of China, building up China to be the next big enemy. So they're very close to binning Russia. Potentially good news for Russia is that Russia's going to lose its status as the number one public enemy of the United States mainstream media and political establishment. This could easily be transferred to China. And certainly that would suit this president, current president, in his next election, to be kind of running with this kind of demonization of China, because he's also in a trade war with China as well. So anything to paint China as a bad actor is a good thing, could be a good thing for the Trump administration. Everyone needs a boogeyman, and Russia just doesn't fit the bill anymore. They've sort of used that one. They've let out all the steam out of the Russiagate thing. So China is next in line. China's next. North Korea's out, not so bad anymore. So we need somebody bad in the Pacific, Mike. Otherwise, we're going to have to close all those bases down.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, look, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me today, Patrick. We will be back at the same time as usual on Friday, 1 p.m. With David Scott, and we will see you then. Bye-bye.